is UnWoke.
Welcome to it. It is TV's Rob is UnWoke. I am your unhumble host, TV's Rob, and this week I am joined again by Michael NP1701 and Princess Patriot Captain Stephen Avery to rank the Star Trek films. Now, when we got into the discussion, it took a long time, so I'm going to spare you the entire conversation, and we're going to break it up into some chunks, because I don't think you want to sit through 3 hours of three nerds talking Star Trek. I mean, I don't mind it, and I didn't mind actually going through and recording it, but I'm going to spare you and let you watch it in chunks or listen to it in chunks, however you consume this podcast. If you didn't know, this episode is going to be up on YouTube, so if you actually want to see what people look like, which I don't know why you would, there's a reason I work in radio or behind the scenes in TV. Nobody really wants to see this. Not even my wife wants to see this, okay? But if you do want to see it, check it out on YouTube. Just search TV's Rob is UnWoke, all right? And a link will be in the description of this episode for you as well. So, before I get into the conversation with Stephen and Michael, Tuesday, October 12th, 2021, is a momentous day in history. William Shatner, the man who portrayed Captain James Tiberius Kirk, is going to space in Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin penis rocket. That's right. Captain Kirk is going to space at 90 years old. He will be the oldest man in history to go to space. Now, I know he's not going to outer space. He's not going to be able to say the whole Star Trek mantra, space the final frontier, because he's not really out there, but he's still going to space. It counts as space. And he will be just the second cast member of Star Trek to go to space, behind James Doohan, who, when he passed, his ashes were taken to space. So he's the second, but he's the first. You get it. You get it. But Shatner joined Anderson Cooper on CNN to talk a little bit about his experience coming up and how he's feeling about it.
It's a little scary, I got to tell you.
Yeah, some people made fun of the way the rocket looks, but I think it's cool. I like it. I think the weightless thing, I think, would be fun.
Well, no, there's nothing to be, nothing to make fun of. We're inseminating the space program that is. I want to press my nose up against the plastic window. What I don't want to see is somebody else out there looking back at me. No, we don't want that one. I'm really quite apprehensive, as you might have guessed.
Yeah, you seem really nervous. You seem really.
I'm a little bit nervous about that.
Are you?
No, I really am. There's an element of the chance here.
Well,
man.
yeah, there is.
This isn't like going on one of the various life-ending possibilities that I've done all my life.
Right.
I've been on things that, oh wow, that makes me nervous.
But you ride horses fast and you.
I rode a big motorcycle from Chicago to Los Angeles. All that traffic.
Yeah, I mean
I faced death.
That's
hour
a death
by
trap.
hour.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So
That's
this
what
is
I'm
nothing.
telling you, and I'm more afraid of. So, but when I come back, imagine the sanguinity and the ease and the peace that we can talk about. And but more importantly, is what will I see when I'm out there?
You're going to be transformed.
What will I see?
It's going to be a new you who comes back to Earth.
Yeah, because not only will I look at the majesty of space and the oasis of Earth, but isn't there a possibility that things fly by, as we've seen on cameras?
Yeah.
What are those? What's the explanation of that?
Well, Captain, I think I speak on behalf of all of us nerds when I say, live long and prosper, and best of luck going up there this week in that penis-shaped rocket. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, my conversation with Stephen and Michael ranking Star Trek movies. Michael, what's your worst Trek movie?
So, if we're including the Kelvin timeline,
which we are,
it has to be the middle one. What's that one called again? I've avoided it so much that it's blanked out of my
Star
head.
Trek Eggs Benedict
Into
Cumberbatch.
Darkness.
Into Darkness. That's it.
That's what it's called.
That's it.
I looked up John Harrison. Until a year ago, he didn't exist.
John Harrison was a fiction created the moment I was awoken by your Admiral Marcus to help him advance his cause. A smokescreen to conceal my true identity. My name is Khan.
It's worst on my list for a lot of reasons, one of which it caused a serious controversy in the House over Star Trek in the first place.
You got to tell us that. You
because
got to tell us that story.
I'll tell this story again. My wife and I, when they first started making these movies again, I sat my wife down and I said, look, I know you haven't seen all these movies. We've got to go through them so you have an idea of where they're going to leave off, where they're going to start off. And then I found out the first one was basically a remake of just starting the storyline over again. And then when we'd seen Wrath of Khan, which, of course, we'll get to that one. But then it turned out that they had used the Wrath of Khan to make Into Darkness. And I never conceived that they would do something like that. Because in the industry even, it's argued as the best movie. And yet they took it and turned it on its head and changed everything. So that one is definitely the bottom of the list for me.
All right. Captain Steve of Princesses.
So definitely Into Darkness was by far the worst one. They took a well-beloved Star Trek storyline, a well-beloved Star Trek villain, and they completely obliterated them. So, on top of my general dislike of the Kelvin timeline, simply because there is absolutely no real science involved with any of it. There's no way they could travel as fast as they did in the movies with the technology they had at the time, and various things like that. But there was no super blood thing involved with the genetic men of the eugenics wars. So that was something they completely made up just to justify, killing and then bringing Kirk back. Who in their right mind thought Bendy Lick Cucumber Patch would make a great Khan? I have no idea. That man, no, not at all. Bad choice altogether. Not to mention, the storyline makes no sense anyway. The whole point behind Wrath of Khan was he was completely pissed off at how things went regarding the first meeting with Kirk, right? He got beat. He could accept he got beat, and he had to accept whatever happened. And then the SETI Alpha 6 blew up, screwed up SETI Alpha 5. Nobody bothered to check on them, and he lost his wife, lost a lot of his people, and now he's out for revenge, right? The whole Khan thing, there was no point to what Khan was doing other than, I want to get my people back. Why the hell did they wind up where they were in the first place? The storyline just made no sense whatsoever. They completely destroyed a beloved villain. They completely destroyed a beloved story. They completely cheesed out with the whole reversal of who died and then bringing them back, and completely cheapened that. It's absolutely horrible story.
You would think that with what you consider to be a higher grade of actor, because these weren't like your typical sci-fi actors in this movie, you would think that they would have been able to, hit you in the feels with the Kirk and Spock role reversal scene. Mm-hmm. But there were no feels at all. There were none. And I felt that kind of cheapened it. I am going to go with Into Darkness at the very bottom as well, because for many of the same reasons that you've both given. At the same time, I think that Eggs Benedict Cumberbatch was a great John Harrison. He was a terrible Khan. Plain and simple. I didn't like the idea of how we're going to stuff these people into torpedoes. While I don't argue with the subject matter, I do disagree with the awkward, let's put Alice Eve in her underwear scene. Like I said, I'm not.
I don't know. I kind of
like I said, I'm not going to argue with the subject matter. I appreciate the subject. I just felt like the scene was shoehorned in there for no reason other than, hey, let's show off how much Captain Kirk is just a hornball dumbass. I mean, come on.
To be fair, though, that was like the one good point of the movie.
Like I said, I'm not going to argue with the subject matter. I mean, I'm very grateful to see Alice Eve in any state of undress. So I just felt like it was unnecessary to the story. I mean, honestly, and with her playing Carol Marcus, they didn't really set up anything going forward. And was there anything going forward? At least not on screen. So, I mean, she was giving him the I'm going to fuck you eyes later at the end of the movie, but that's about it. So,
well, I mean, of course, he's Captain Kirk. The only one immune to that is Uhura.
Well, at least the Kelvin Uhura.
Oh, no, the previous Uhura was too. The only reason they even kissed was because they were forced to by godlike being.
I think Uhura would have eventually given it up.
Maybe. I don't know.
She could have been convinced.
I'm not.
So
possibly.
And even though she's not with us since she was working morning drive and is in bed, my wife decided to give me a couple of her movies in order. I forget most of them, but her absolute worst, Star Trek Nemesis. For one reason and one reason only. The cheap death of Data at the end.
Definitely.
So
I don't see how that was a cheap death.
Did it really need to happen? Did it really give you the sense of a proper send-off for a beloved character?
I mean, saving his captain. I mean, that was the most. That's the most human thing one could do.
But then when you look back at Picard, it just doesn't seem to fit.
What about it?
Mm-hmm. And then how many times have you seen someone beamed up where they grab the guy at the last second and like two of them beam up at the same time?
Yeah.
In the same matter.
And having Picard just kind of look at Data like, what? Come on.
I mean, the transporters weren't working. The only reason Data even got over there was because they blew him out of an open hallway. They didn't even beam him over. He had to float over there and enter through an outer hatch.
And you also saw that death coming a mile away thanks to the whole, earlier in the movie, it's like, Geordi gave me this prototype for the emergency transporter unit. You know, and Picard's like, oh, but it'll only work for one of us. Yeah, like, this is going to come back into play at some point. Somebody's going to die, and it's not going to be the captain, so.
Completely foreshadowed. I mean, if you didn't see that coming, you were an idiot. But, I mean, I don't think it was a cheap death at all. Data did exactly what he felt was necessary, and it was one of the most human things that, you know, a person could do. I mean, in that one act, he proved himself to be every bit human that he wished to be.
She still didn't like it. I mean, she's not going to. I mean, she wouldn't dive nearly into the depths of nerdiness that we would. But for her, it was just. I didn't like the fact that they killed Data, so I don't like that movie. It's at the bottom. All right, so number 12, Michael, take it away.
Star Trek Beyond. It was clunky. It was unnecessarily complicated, and it was a waste of Idris Elba.
Space. The final frontier.
These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its continuing mission
to explore strange new worlds,
to seek out new life
and new civilizations,
to boldly go where no one has gone before.
All right. That's pretty straightforward. I can't really argue many of those points. Steve, what about you?
2009 for me.
Really?
So.
Oh, really?
Don't get me wrong. The entire Kelvin timeline is at the bottom of my list. But for me, 2009, about the only thing about it that I've really enjoyed was the casting. I thought they did pretty well with the casting, although in the later movies they kind of overplayed a lot of the stereotypes they put into the characters. But as far as it goes, for one thing, the science just wasn't there for me. I mean, you've got a ship that's barely holding on in close proximity to a black hole, and in order to escape the black hole, it ejects its power source, which means it no longer has engines, and there's no explosion anywhere that's going to blow you back out of a black hole once you're in. So the warp drive of the time, there's no way you're getting from Earth to Vulcan in 20 minutes from a dead start, or from absolute standstill to reaching Vulcan. You're not getting there in 20 minutes with those warp engines. I mean, with next generation engines operating warp 8, warp 9, yeah, probably, maybe, but not in that timeline. So, and who in God's name decided to make the Enterprise look like an Apple store? I mean, seriously.
J. Abrams.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even then, Apple stores weren't really a thing when that happened, when that movie was made. The iPhone was just a couple years old.
That's true. And are there that many lens flares in an Apple store? I don't know.
Yes.
One run by J.J. Abrams.
Yes.
So, but I mean, and the whole way that they operated these ships, it was just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, you're not coming out of warp and immediately firing all weapons into a cloud of missiles expecting to actually hit anything, especially not with the technology of that time. They didn't have weapons that cycled that quickly. They didn't have the ability to transition from warp to subspace that quickly. Their sensors weren't even that good. I mean, they basically just took science, threw it out the window, and completely made up their own stuff. I mean, had they taken these three movies and named them anything other than Star Trek, I would probably like them a hell of a lot more than I do right now.
All right. Fair enough. For me, I actually agree more with Michael on this one with Beyond. And a lot of it, again, waste of Idris Elba, but at the same time, that massive station Yorktown. Come on. You mean to tell me that your star bases are basically livable planets in the middle of space that were artificially built and created?
I wouldn't even go that far. It's a giant hamster ball.
Yeah. Or was it that Bones called it a snow globe or whatever? I mean, a lot of it was far-fetched. The introduction of the USS Franklin, although only went warp 4, the NX registry was higher than that of the NX-01 Enterprise, which was the first warp 5 vessel. Yet it was ginormous. It just a lot of continuity issues with that particular movie. And the thing I dislike about all of the Kelvin movies, your hero ship is a tissue, basically. In every single one of those, the Enterprise gets beat up to the point where it's basically going to be destroyed. And I hate that.
Well, they hadn't yet invented plot armor, so.
Okay, that's what it is. But in this movie, you actually destroyed the Enterprise long before you're actually supposed to. And then you get a new Enterprise A at the very, very end of the movie that while it looks different from what they were working with before and was supposed to address the design flaws of the Constitution class, it was way, way, way far ahead of when it should have been. I mean, at that point, what has the Enterprise done that warrants having a second ship with the same name? Nothing.
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. I think that was my biggest issue with that movie. And I also didn't like the fact that this is the movie that we're going to release to celebrate the 50th anniversary of this franchise. This was the movie. Does that really represent what your franchise is? They did zero promotion for it. The crew seemed like they couldn't care less about being there. The only, quote, bright spot that I liked, the only part that I really liked about it and actually hit me in the feels, not because of anything that the cast did, but because this was the first movie after the death of Leonard Nimoy. And they addressed the fact that Ambassador Spock died, and they gave him, they gave young Spock some of the personal effects. When he opens it up, you see this picture of the crew of the original, you see the original cast in a promotional photo for Star Trek V. And I only know it was Star Trek V because of Uhura's hair. but you see that, and that hit me in the feels because that was still very raw at the time. And when being able to place that, I was like, oh, they did it in a touching way that didn't feel like it was forced in there at all. So that was cool. It was also a shame that it was the first movie since the death of Anton. So at least them paying tribute to him in the credits and everything, that was really touching as well. So they did the right things with that, but everything else. And I felt bad for Justin Lin, the director, because come on, he was doing Fast and Furious movies before that. How are you? It's not like you can make the Enterprise drift.
They'll try.
No, he just destroyed the damn thing like a punk.
Thank God. I don't know what they did between End of Darkness and Beyond, but it's like they made the Enterprise like 3 times taller and like half as thin, or like twice as thin. As the thing looked like it stood like this.
Oh yeah, that was intentional. They intentionally used a different CGI model because they wanted to show that there are severe design flaws with this class of ship. So the neck and the warp nacelle braces, were designed to look that small. It wasn't
even the same model that they used in the first 2 movies.
No, they changed it up at the very end of Into Darkness to give it that look, knowing that they were going to destroy the thing in the 3rd movie.
So yet another reason why these 3 movies are just the absolute worst.
And another plus for it, no lens flares. Because JJ wasn't at the helm.
That's true.
There were no lens flares.
I honestly didn't even notice that last time I just watched it like a week and a half ago. I'd only ever watched it once. And I swore I was never going to do it again, but then I did it just to make sure I was ready for this.
Go back and you will not see. You might see a couple, but nothing like J.J. Abrams, who was just wanking it the whole time, going lens flare, lens flare, lens flare.
Yeah, I think watching it one additional time just to make sure I remembered it enough to talk about it here was enough. I'm not going to go back and watch it just to count lens flares.
But it's fun. All right, so what's up next for you, Michael?
So, I mean, obviously, it's going to be Star Trek 2009 for me. I'm definitely a Star Trek traditionalist, and just the changes they made. I'm really happy that Leonard Nimoy was involved in it, though, because that settled a lot of what I was expecting this to be. and it made it easier to take. And they still had things that upset me about, like, destroying the entire planet of Vulcan. Just the different, and especially the scientific ignorance that I see in the Kelvin timeline. I mean, I agree with you, Steve, that they seem to build the story and then try to science it instead of make the limitations of the technology part of the story, like regular real Star Trek does.
I can't argue that. Can't argue that one bit. So, Steve, what about you?
So, Beyond is...
I was going to say, since the Kelvin ones were at the bottom
11.
of his list.
Yeah, I mean, the big justifications why I put that one at the top of the Kelvin timeline, they destroyed that abomination of a ship.
But did they give us anything better
really
to
about
replace it? I don't think so.
Well, no, but with any luck, they're not going to make any more, and we won't have to continue staring at it. But really, that's about the only thing that justified it over those others, is they completely destroyed that abomination of a ship, and I loved that. I saw that thing getting ripped to shreds, and I started thanking the Lord. I mean, otherwise, the overall storyline was pretty decent. I just didn't like some of the elements involved in it, such as the giant hamster ball in space. Really could have done without that. I did kind of enjoy them, the way they went and destroyed the alien swarm when they were attacking Yorktown, even though that was completely scientifically not possible. It was entertaining to watch.
What? The Beastie Boys saves everything. Beastie Boys save everything.
I'm not arguing with that. I'm just, scientifically speaking, it's completely out of left field. I mean, it makes no sense that, okay, we're disrupting communications, so they explode. I'm not quite understanding how that works, but I'm not going to argue with it. I mean, it was good music, big explosions. I'll run with it. It's a bad movie anyway. You might as well enjoy it, in any way you can. Idris Elba, yeah. I mean, that was just an absolute waste of him. I'm not sure that you really could have found anybody better to do it. I mean, other than maybe my cat. But, I mean, out of the three of them, like, if somebody put a gun to my head and said, you have to pick one of these movies to watch right now, it would be Beyond.
And yet you couldn't count the lens flares. Or lack thereof.
I wasn't that interested in the movie.
For me, it's 2009 Star Trek, because of all of the reasons that we've already been discussing. Lens flare, lens flare, lens flare, lens flare, lens flare. I think there were 1,000 lens flares in this movie. And I get what J.J. Abrams was going for, giving it more texture, more dimension, more blah, 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 blah. But there is far too many. I mean, I'm thinking I wouldn't be able to be on that ship for more than 2 minutes, because the glares and the flares would drive me insane. The human eyes aren't meant for that. I mean, that's why we have polarized sunglasses, for crying out loud. You mean to tell me that they couldn't get rid of that stuff 300 years into the future? Screw you, JJ. Come on. And the other part for me was, it felt like a Michael Bay movie, where you do a little bit of plot development, a little bit of character development, and then you spend the rest of the time blowing shit up.
Actually, I think had Michael Bay been the one in charge of it, it probably would have been a better movie.
Maybe. But then you start looking at his track record with the Transformers movies, and you really have to wonder.
Which, honestly, if I had to pick between the Kelvin timeline or the Michael Bay Transformers, it would be the Michael Bay Transformers. I mean...
At least you know what you're going into.
Exactly, yeah. That's true. You know what to expect when you have, the Michael Bay movies. That's true. The other thing was, go ahead.
Then again, if Michael Bay had been involved, instead of lens flares every time you turn your head, you could have been seeing micro explosions, and then that's just an even worse safety hazard.
That's true. The other thing was, I didn't like the way that JJ, right after that one, that's when, and Into Darkness, his whole career progression from that movie became, oh, you're going to become the new guy for Star Wars. And what did he do in the first movie that he directed of the Star Wars franchise? No lens flares. You son of a bitch. You used this as your demo reel for Star Wars, and you screwed us over by having 1,000 lens flares, but then you didn't do a single one in Star Wars. Fuck you. Pissed me off.
At least with the lightsabers, it would have made a little more sense.
Exactly. But did he do it? No. So
instead, it was foggy half the time.
Exactly. I liked the casting choices for 2009 Star Trek. I didn't like the way that Quinto played the character of Spock. The whole, I'm going to rage out, then all of a sudden I'm going to regret, try to start repressing emotions again. Come on. No. It was too choppy and back and forth, where with Nimoy you had that nuance. But the amount of respect that everybody showed to Leonard Nimoy, I thought was really cool. I mean, there are some redeeming qualities of it, but I didn't feel like there was enough character development. Everybody was just kind of thrown in, and we were, as an established audience, we already knew who these people were, although some of their backstories have been changed. And I didn't like Kirk basically being a criminal.
Yeah, that didn't make a lot of sense to me either.
It sort of did to me, simply because in the Prime timeline, he grew up with his father. His father actually saw him become the captain of the Enterprise, whereas in the Kelvin timeline, his dad dies like immediately after he was born. He grew up without his father. So, it's his mom and whoever that weirdo was that she later marries that he had completely no respect for whatsoever. I mean, to me, it kind of makes sense, because it was still the Kirk who was going to do whatever it took to get what he wanted, but it wasn't tempered by, the respect and the discipline that his father instilled in him.
Oh, and does anybody else find it strange that you have a captain of a ship who didn't even graduate from Starfleet Academy?
Technically, none of them had graduated yet. I mean, they were still in the academy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, except Spock, yes.
So doesn't that seem a little weird?
The entire Kelvin timeline trilogy is weird to me. I mean, but if you're going to go with weird, you might as well go all out weird. And for some people, it worked. For those of us that actually know something about Star Trek, it's complete crap.
You too, if you cheat on tests and you sleep with anything that walks, you too can become captain of a starship.
Well, I mean,
without graduating.
That's essentially what happened in the Prime timeline. But again, it was the way Kirk handled it, right? In the Prime timeline, he did it to show he's willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done. Whereas in the Kelvin timeline, he did it just to give a giant fuck you to Starfleet.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, but that's a
you
big
can give
difference.
me all the you can give me all the roadblocks you want. I'm still going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. You know, they were kind of nailing Kirk one way or another, just giving him a different set of circumstances. But at least with Prime Kirk, he felt like the guy was qualified to be doing what he was doing. This guy seemed like he was just literally pulling shit out of his ass all of the time and just throwing darts at a dartboard, hoping something hits.
Well, like I said, you know, Prime Kirk grew up with his father. He had that role model. He got that respect and discipline instilled in him.
He also graduated from Starfleet Academy.
Worked
his way through the ranks.
Whereas Kelvin Kirk lost his dad immediately upon being born. His mom is Winona Ryder. I mean, that would screw up anybody.
No, Spock's mom was Winona Ryder.
Spock's mom.
Jennifer Morrison was Kirk's mom.
Thank you.
Yes.
Which, I mean...
Well, no wonder Spock was so screwed
I wouldn't kick
up.
either one of them out of bed, so it's all good.